blue helmet with the white band and the green jacket of Mike Hawthorne. Hello folks, I'm Alex Burnham, welcome to another Motorsport Detective. So I came across a series of old photographs from an unknown race meeting, and so we're going to see if we can figure out where they're from. I'll scan them in and then we'll look and see what's on them. Alright, so first picture we've got, it's quite clearly a Ferrari Formula 1 car from the 1950s. It's a little bit blurry, this one, so the details are hard to see, but it's quite recognisable. Second picture shows a Van Wall Formula 1 car. This one's a little bit clearer so we can make out the race number on it, but there's not a huge amount of information as to where this race might be. The third photograph, however, has a little recognisable feature that's going to help us work out what we've got here. The picture is of another Ferrari Formula 1 car, but quite distinctively behind the wheel we've got the blue helmet with the white band and the green jacket of Mike Hawthorne. Now I don't know exactly when these photos were taken, so let's use some of the little clues hidden in those photos to try and solve the mystery. First observations, it's quite a flat circuit and it looks like quite a sunny day. These are incidental really, but they might come into hand a bit later on. Second off, we've got Ferrari and Van Wall. This gives us a period in which to work. The race numbers are a great clue because we can use those to really identify an event. Back in the 1950s, race numbers were given out at individual races, and so the race numbers on these cars will be different throughout the season. They didn't stick with the same number on a car, or like in modern day Formula 1, a driver throughout their career. So this can really help us pinpoint those dates. So I've gone through the career of Mike Hawthorne, because he is recognisable in the photographs, to work out when he was in Ferrari. Now Mike Hawthorne changed teams a few times over his Formula 1 driver's career, but he was with Ferrari for 1953 and 54, and after a break driving for a few other teams he was with them for 57, and then in 1958, which was his championship winning year. So our photos must come from 53, 4, 7 or 8. Next up, I looked into what sort of Van Wall is in the picture. Van Wall were actually only racing in Formula 1 for a short period really, about a decade or so. And they had several cars over this time. But by looking at the evolution of Van Wall cars, we've been able to identify this one as the VW5. With its low nose and quite high back, it's quite a distinctive look. Now the VW5 was only used for about 3 seasons of Formula 1, 1958, 59 and 60. Now Mike Hawthorne retired from Formula 1 after winning the championship in 1958, which is the same year this car was introduced. So it must be a race from the 1958 season, as that's the only time these two things overlap. So I've gone straight to the source, the Formula 1 official website, and on this it lists races from every season over the decades, and we can find out not just who was driving what and when, but also their race numbers. Here we have the 1958 season, and we could see all the races that took place, and by going into each of those we're able to bring up the entrance lists and the results from the event, and you'll notice that the numbers of the cars change depending on which event we're on. So here for example in the Argentine Grand Prix, Sterling Moss is driving car number 14. If we go back and look at the Monaco event and find Sterling Moss, now he's in car 28. So, by using our system of searching for race numbers, we just have to look for Hawthorne in car 2 and Van Wall with car 9, and when we've got an event with both of those, we've got pretty good confirmation we've got the right event. It turns out that the Van Walls weren't at the Argentine Grand Prix, so we can instantly discount that event. Next up, we look for Monaco, but the numbers are wrong. The Ferraris and the Van Walls don't match up with our 2 and 9. On to the Netherlands again, and once more we don't have confirmation of Hawthorne with the 2 and then a Van Wall with the number 9, and we'll just keep on doing this throughout the season. Alright, so we've got it. The British Grand Prix of 1958. Mike Hawthorne is in Ferrari number 2, and there's a Van Wall with number 9 driven by Stuart Lewis Evans. That gives us 2 confirmed sort of points of reference. We can add to that the circumstantial stuff, The flat-looking circuit in the photographs, well, that links up with Silverstone. Plus, it was a July race in the middle of summer, so the sunny day in the pictures, again, that sort of links up to everything. So I'm pretty confident we've got the right event. Now, using this information, we can now find out who was in those photographs. So we knew we had Mike Hawthorne in that number 2 Ferrari. We now know that the number 9 Van Wall was Stuart Lewis-Evans. But the other Ferrari in the final photograph, well, that's a bit harder because the number's blurred and we can't really see. There were 3 Ferraris at that event. One was driven by the eventual winner, Peter Collins, and the other was driven by Wolfgang von Trips. We've got to be one of these 2 guys, really. And so we need to look into other recognisable features. And the good thing about open wheel sports like this is that you can see the helmet. Now, back in the 50s, drivers didn't have quite as distinctive helmets as they do in the modern era. But there are still enough differences to mean that sometimes we can find out. We need to find a picture, first of all, of Peter Collins and see what colour helmet he was running. Okay, so I found a race report of that event online, and it shows Peter Collins in Ferrari number 1 wearing a sort of a brown helmet. Now, the photo clearly shows quite a light coloured, almost certainly white helmet, so I don't think it can be Peter Collins. It's probably Von Trips. All we need to do is find a picture of him at that Silverstone event and double check what colour helmet he was wearing. So there we have it. Car number 3, Wolfgang von Trips, driving with a white helmet, just as in our photograph. So we've been able to identify all 3 pictures and the event they were at. Now, I think these pictures are absolutely stunning, really beautiful. Now, art obviously is in the eye of the beholder, but these are as good as any oil painting or motorsport art that I've seen. They really deserve to be framed and put on the wall because they are such nice pictures. And they really show an interesting snapshot of that 1958 season. First up, Van Wall. Well, Van Wall really is one of those teams that set the precedent of British race car manufacturing. And we today have so many Formula 1 teams based in Great Britain, largely due to Van Wall and Cooper, who set that precedent and broke away from the European, largely Italian race teams who had dominated before. I have found this quite interesting picture of the Van Wall cost £50,000. Now today, £50,000 would barely build you a Formula 1 stock car for the short ovals in this country, let alone a Grand Prix racer. But back in the 1950s, well, that was a huge amount of money, obviously. But it shows really how special the British press thought these Van Walls were. And they were, because they really gave us winning team and winning drivers. In fact, that Silverstone race, that had seen Peter Collins win, and he was one of a group of British drivers, along with Mike Hawthorne, Stuart Lewis-Evans and Stirling Moss, and people like that who were really starting to show that Britain could play with the big boys in motorsport. Although an up-and-coming star, unfortunately Stuart Lewis-Evans would lose his life by the end of the 1958 season, crashing at the Moroccan Grand Prix and then dying later back home in England. He was one of several drivers to lose his life that year, and so shocked were the Van Wall team by this accident and his death that they withdrew. It ended their involvement in Formula 1. Mike Hawthorne would win that year's championship, only with one Grand Prix victory to his name that season, but it was enough for him to hold off Stirling Moss to the title, really showing how far British drivers and teams had come, that they were the ones fighting out for the top honours. Unfortunately, shortly after retiring from Formula 1 racing at the end of that season, Mike Hawthorne would crash in a road accident and he too would lose his life. So 1958 was one of the worst Formula 1 seasons ever in terms of driver deaths. However, we still remember it as Mike Hawthorne's winning year. With these amazing pictures, we can remember that time when Formula 1 really started to swing in favour of British teams and drivers. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing these pictures and finding out a little bit about their history. Please do look out some of my other videos on my channels, find me on social media, and come back again another time for more mini motorsport mysteries.